Hey everyone, RogueGold here, welcome back to the Division 2. And today, I want to discuss the new exotic item that we got in the game this week. Now, everybody this past week, myself included, has been swept up in talking about things like the new Hunter Mask, raid exotics, loot boxes. I have barely seen anybody cover this thing so far. And so, in this video, I not only want to break down this new exotic item, but also give some of my impressions of it after trying it out in both PvE and PvP. Beyond that though, I also want to talk about how it got majorly buffed from its presentation in the public test server for this update, but also discuss how there are a couple of problems with how it is in the game right now. So, we've got a lot to go over, we'll get right to it. If you end up enjoying the video and you want to see more stuff like it in the future, I would appreciate you clicking that subscribe button if you've not already, but without further ado, let's go. Alright, so this is the new exotic item in question. It is a backpack called the Birdie's Quick Fix Pack. As far as the visuals, I like it a lot. I really love the dynamically moving camera that you see at the top of it there. If you're wondering how to pick up this new item, it is available exclusively from this season's climax mission for Kelso at Roosevelt Island. You have a random chance to be awarded this item upon completion or replay of the mission. Those chances increase with how high you put the difficulty. And then additionally, if you choose to tackle the master difficulty of this mission, the very first time you complete that, it will be awarded to you guaranteed. Alright, so let's get a little bit deeper into the item here. The flavor text reads, "Get up, we're out of body bags." This exotic comes with a skill tier, skill haste, and repair skills. But before we look at its talent, I actually want to show you the talent that was presented to us back in the public test server and in the initial patch notes for this season, because it is pretty noticeably weaker and different from the version that we actually ended up getting today in the live game. So the combat medic talent used to read, you get 50% revive speed, minus 50% weakened debuff timer, which for any who don't know, that is the like broken heart symbol that you'll get if you get revived too many times, and then if you die while you have that debuff, you'll just die immediately. You won't go into the down state, so the amount of time that is active on you gets shrunk when you wear this exotic. And then it reads, provides 50% damage resistance to both agents while reviving or being revived, and for 5 seconds after a successful revive. Successful revives provide +1 skill tier for 30 seconds, revives at skill tier 6 grant overcharge for 15 seconds. Okay, so that's the old one, and you can see at the bottom that they were investigating functionality with the revive hive for this item. Here is the new version of the combat medic talent. It has got way more juice than it did before. So you now receive plus 90% revive speed, you still have the minus 50% weakened debuff timer, you get 45% hive efficiency, and then it reads provides 50% damage resistance to both agents while reviving or being revived, and for 5 seconds after a successful hive revive or 10 seconds after a manual revive. Any successful revives provide +1 skill tier for 5 seconds, revives at skill tier 6, grant overcharge for 30 seconds. Okay, so just as a recap of what got buffed here compared to that previous version, the revive speed went up from 50 to 90, the hive efficiency buff was not there before, it is now, the revive hive inherited the old damage resistance timer of 5 seconds, that is now doubled for a manual revive, you get 10 seconds of that buff, and the overcharge duration got doubled, it was previously 15 seconds, it's now 30. The only nerf that I see here is the additional skill tier buff went down from 30 to 5 seconds, that is obviously pretty significant. I assume they just wanted to shift all of the focus here to a skill tier 6 build to get that overcharge. But yeah, in theory this all sounds great, right? This item got a huge buff. Obviously the talent and the actual thing that this item is trying to accomplish is a bit more niche in terms of its application, but I think when used well, at least on paper, it can be super powerful for team stability, getting that consistent overcharge, getting those damage resistance buffs. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a problem with this item, and that's what I want to take a look at next. So largely there are two problems with this exotic item that kind of feed into one another. The first is what is, in my opinion, a pretty poor talent description layout, as well as a lack of clarification. The first problem is just trying to read this thing coherently. The stat boosts at the top are colored differently from one another, right? The revive speed and the weakened debuff timer are in orange, whereas the hive efficiency is just in the plain white text. So that's kind of confusing. Those things are also not properly separated from the actual function talent part of it. So just in terms of readability, I would love if they could make this look a little bit closer to how the Acosta's Go Bag exotic backpack does it, where it separates its stat boost from its actual function talent. So that's one side of it, but the other larger issue comes in with this item's functionality. So in the case of this exotic item, there are 4 kinds of different revives, right? There is a manual revive from an agent who is in the down state. There is a manual revive from an agent who is completely dead. There's then a hive revive from an agent who is in the down state, and a hive revive from an agent who is fully dead. Now you'd think that this exotic and talent had taken those things into consideration, especially given that they already specify between a manual and a hive revive in the damage resistance portion of the talent. However, upon getting this item and doing some testing, there are some big discrepancies in terms of the buffs given between those 4 different types of revives. And at this point in time, partially due to the talent's lack of clarification, it's kind of impossible to know if this item is bugged or if those discrepancies are intended. So I had a friend help me out here to demonstrate the 4 different types of revives. We went through simulating all 4 of those different types, and this is what I was able to gather. If you do a manual revive from an agent who is just in the down state, this is actually the only type of revive that benefits from that plus 90% revive speed buff. Now, just as a side note, this is awesome, how you can just go up, click a button, and they're instantly revived. That is very cool. But yeah, this is actually the only type of revive that benefits from any kind of a speed buff. Additionally, unlike what the talent would suggest, there is no damage resistance given to this kind of a revive. That whole thing about you and the revivee getting damage resistance, that does not apply here. You also don't get any overcharge from this kind of a revive, even though it says in the talent that any successful revive will provide it. You do not get it for this manual revive of a downed agent. Then taking a look at a manual revive from an agent who is fully dead. As I said before, you do not get any kind of speed buff for this one. It's the exact same speed as you're accustomed to. However, this time you do indeed get the damage resistance buff. That is the little asterisk and knife icon that you'll see on my HUD as well as above my teammate's head. One weird discrepancy though is that the revivee seems to lose the buff before you do, which is not what the talent describes. You're supposed to have it for 10 seconds if you do this manual revive. But then aside from that, you do indeed get the intended skill overcharge from this form of a revive. Then let's shift over to the revive hive. If we first take a look at a hive revive from the down state, once again you get no speed buff here. It's the same speed as usual. You do indeed get the damage resistance buff though from this form of a down state revive. Again, what's kind of weird though is that the reviver gets a 10-second buff of this, which is contrary to the talent, which says it should only be 5. And then once again you do get skill overcharge from doing this. And then finally we have the hive revive from an agent who is fully dead. Things here work exactly the same as the down state hive revive. No speed buff, damage resistance, overcharge. Okay, so are you confused yet? I certainly am. By the way, before we really break this down, something else that I noticed, the overcharge buff on this item doesn't seem to have a cooldown. That's kind of a big deal. I believe every other form of overcharge in the game does. But again, is that intended? Is it a bug because the talent just didn't clarify? I don't know. But from what I was able to see, you can lose the overcharge period, revive somebody again right away, and you have that overcharge for 30 seconds. So, talking about the item in terms of all of those things that we just took a look at, it's not that some of these individual buffs aren't strong, right? Having basically an instant revive from the down state, having stuff like shared damage resistance, having such a high uptime for overcharge, those are fantastic. But when you have a talent here that does not clarify between revives from the down and dead states, and, you know, in some of those discrepancies between the manual and hive revives, it just becomes very odd to try and decipher which interaction gets which buff. I'm inclined to believe that this item is indeed bugged, given that some of the existing talent descriptions don't apply like they should. Like, for example, we talked about the damage resistance period on the revivee, and so that's kind of the problem here, is just a really big inconsistency in application. I would be much more inclined to use this exotic if the damage resistance applied to a manual revive from the down state. That would be huge for PvP. I also really wish that the revive speed buff applied to any other revive type other than the manual down state. So yeah, I really hope that the devs do a pass on this item, both to clean up its description flow and readability, as well as to clarify whether the buffs are intended to work this way, or if not, then to debug its inconsistencies. That said, that's of course a future hypothetical. I did do some testing in the item's current form, both in PvE and PvP. Here were some of my impressions. So, in PvE, I took this into a legendary mission. It was kind of an ideal circumstance because I played with a group who doesn't usually do a ton of that kind of content. If you're curious, this was the build that I used. I just tried to put together a pretty standard healer build, and it was definitely decent, right? The auto revive from down was very nice to be able to run around around and just instantly get people back up. The continuous amount of overcharge from reviving people when they were dead was really solid. That helped out. And actually one of the coolest interactions I thought was how the damage resistance that's applied to yourself during a revive was pretty handy. It meant that if somebody was dead, you know, kind of in an unideal spot, I could run up, drop a chem launcher heal charge, and basically soak all of the incoming damage while reviving that person. So it's certainly not bad here. I would say that probably the most useful application of this exotic in PvE content is going to be decreasing the friction in legendary stuff, primarily for groups that are not super experienced or maybe optimized to run that kind of content. If you've got people going down quite a lot, then birdies can help out by a good bit. But again, it would of course be better if it were not bugged, assumedly. Alright, and then for PvP, I played a series of conflict games. I used that exact same Future Initiative healing build. Now this is where I was most curious to test out this item, and it's really tough, right? On the one hand, having the 90% faster manual revives is clutch. I was able to get a really good clip where I saved a teammate where in any other circumstance, he would have been 100% dead, right? It was right in front of the line of enemy fire. Even if I'd had a revive 5 on the ground ready to go, it would not have saved him. It would have taken too long. And so in that sense, Birdie does open up those kinds of opportunities that no other item in the game is going to give you. But while that is nice, given the fact that the overcharge mechanic and system is completely disabled in PvP, that part of the talent goes out the window. And given the fact that the damage resistance part of the talent currently only applies to revives from people who are fully dead, which you cannot revive people who are dead in the Dark Zone or Conflict, then currently the only buffs that you get from using this item in PvP are the hive efficiency and the instant pickups. Again, I really wish that they would enable the damage resistance buff to work with the manual down revive. That would really change the game in terms of its PvP usage. But given we don't have that, this item is definitely good in PvP. It's just really hard to justify using it over other options. So that is the breakdown, everybody. I know I had to get pretty technical in this video. I hope it wasn't too hard to follow along with. But I wanted to put the time in to test this because I really like the idea for this exotic. I just think the execution really needs another look at from the team. I hope this will not be a forgotten item. I really want to use it next season with the new measured assembly gear set, but in its current form, it's just a bit too complicated to try and figure out. So we'll see what they do with it. Those are my thoughts and impressions on this new Birdie's exotic, but as usual, I would love to get your guys' input, whether you are just watching the gameplay of it in this video or you've unlocked it for yourself, maybe you've tried it out a little bit. What are your impressions, thoughts, things that they could improve with this item? You know, even in a world where it's functioning perfectly, do you think it really has a place in the Division 2's build crafting landscape in the endgame? I would love to hear whatever you're thinking down below. That is going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.